The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment, and begged him to lay his hands on him. He took him off by himself, away from the crowd, put his finger into the man's ears, and spitting, touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned, and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened. His speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear, and the mute speak. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
This scene with Jesus and the deaf man is a deeply personal experience and profoundly physical. I try to picture it in my imagination, and so he's got his fingers in the man's ear, and then he spits and he touches the man's tongue. What's he touching the man's tongue with? How is he doing that? However he does it, this is really close. Really close. An incredibly intimate moment. Very different from the other healing stories, the lepers who were healed on the way, or Jesus simply saying, your daughter has been healed. This is different. It's very rare that one encounters exclamation points in the gospel, but they're in this passage. Ephphatha, exclamation point. Be opened, exclamation point. When you see an exclamation point in Scripture, you need to sit up and pay attention to that. So the man is healed, and he can speak plainly. Oh, for the gift of speaking plainly. I should give a homily on speaking plainly sometime. Maybe the next time this passage comes up. But the thing is that at the same time that we are eavesdropping on this personal transformation, so were the people. So now the encounter is also communal. It's public. Word got out. The more Jesus said, please don't do that, the more the people proclaimed it. It is ironic. A man's ears are opened, but the crowd, who can hear perfectly well, stop listening. Let us not do the same. There's something about the people gathered in the gospel accounts that's where trouble happens. They shout for Barabbas. In Luke's gospel, the crowd grumbles. In John's gospel, just a few weeks ago, his own disciples stopped listening to him and returned to their former ways. It's a challenge for us, as it was for them. God has given us the power of hearing so that we can listen to the stirrings of our hearts, to the words of Scripture and the prayers, to the voice of Christ in one another, the signs of the times, and the poor, to truly listen to marginalized people that society tells us that we're supposed to judge them and reject them. We don't do that. Listening ears are what we need. That's the whole point of our Holy Father's call to synodality. Synodality is just a fancy word for listening together. It's the easiest thing in the world, if you want to. That's the key. And if you do, you might be surprised by what you hear. And God has also given us the gift of healing touch, to be able to be like Jesus with the deaf man. Healing touch is a reality. It is a real thing. I have witnessed it in my hospital ministry all the time. All the time. And hopefully you have either experienced it personally for yourself or practiced healing touch without perhaps even being aware of it. I'll tell you a quick story, and then I'll sit down. 40 years ago, I was in college. I was a sophomore at Stonehill College in the Northeast, and I had gotten this raging case of poison ivy. I was allergic to poison ivy, and it was very dangerous, and it was all up my arm, and it was incredibly painful. And all my friends said, "Stay away from me. Don't give me that. Get out of here. Get out of this room," so it could be transmitted through the air. So I went to the school nurse, and this was an older, wise nurse. You could tell that she has seen everything in the universe. And I showed her my poison ivy, and she said, "Oh, that's bad." But then she took my hand, and she took her other hand, and she put it on my poison ivy, on my rash, and just held it there. My poison ivy was hot. Her hand was cool. And it was like a shock went through my body. She prescribed me some calamine, but that wasn't what healed me. That wasn't really what I needed. Now think about that for a moment. For her, that was an automatic thing to do. It was just, that's what a nurse does, right? They touch the wound. She probably didn't realize that that was healing touch. I didn't, because I didn't know what healing touch was. I was a kid. But I remembered it 40 years later. When you touch someone, that can happen. And you won't even know it, because it will just be natural for you to do it. And 40 years, someone will say, "I encountered that person at the right time, at the right moment to help me." 40 years later. One thing is certain. If you stop listening like the crowd in today's gospel and do not reach out to bind up the wounds that God brings to us, nothing will ever happen.